Hey everyone, and welcome back to Retro Legends. Back when arcades were like temples of fun, only a few names had the same legendary power as Golden Axe. It was a game that felt like it came straight out of heroic stories by Howard and Tolkien. It set the standard for a whole type of game with its clanging metal and booming magic. But in 1992, when Sega decided to bring the series back, they didn't just make a simple follow-up. Nope. They started a bigger, bolder, and more amazing project. A game that would push the whole series to new heights in terms of tech and art. This is Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder, one of the most ambitious and impressive beat-em-up games ever seen in arcades. Many people think it's the best game in the series, even though it never got home versions that lived up to its legacy. In this video, we'll go through the history, how it was made, fun facts, and behind-the-scenes stories of a forgotten masterpiece. It's a game that showed off the best of Sega's arcade machines in the 90s. From the start of the series to why it didn't do better in stores, we'll look at the graphics, stories, game design choices, and what people said back then. Welcome to a journey into the legend of the Golden Axe. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more trips into the world of retro gaming. Let's get started. To truly understand how big and important Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder was, we need to go back to 1989, a time when arcades were changing a lot. The 80s had given us many classic games, from platformers to sports games, but a new type of game was getting really popular: side-scrolling beat-em-ups. This type of game really took off with Double Dragon. It showed everyone how fun it could be to play together and how cool it was to have a story that felt real. Sega watched this trend very closely. They realized that players wanted to work together, share the challenge, and most of all, they wanted more exciting worlds than the old plain fighting arenas. That's how Golden Axe came to be. It was made to mix the fast action of beat-em-ups with the epic feel of pure fantasy. The main inspiration came from sword and sorcery stories, a world of wild fights, elemental magic, mythical monsters, and broken kingdoms. This was a world full of muscles, metal, and fire, made famous by things like Conan the Barbarian, Fire and Ice, or the art of Frank Frazetta. Sega wanted to bring all of this into a video game, not just how it looked, but they wanted players to really feel like they were in that world, fighting side by side on a journey that felt like it came straight out of a fantasy book. This idea was perfect for the time. Golden Axe mixed simple gameplay, hitting, grabbing, and running attacks, with new things like magic spells and, most importantly, mounts. Riding a fire-breathing dragon or a creature with fiery whips gave the game a unique and easy-to-spot style. The powerful System 16 allowed for big, detailed characters, and a dark, mythical atmosphere that really stood out in arcades, with their neon lights and the clink of coins. It was a huge hit. In no time, Golden Axe became a household name, and Sega took the chance to bring the game almost everywhere. Master System, Mega Drive, PC Engine, Amiga, Commodore 64, PC MS-DOS. The game came out on many different systems, sometimes with big changes, but always with a strong identity. This wide release helped create a whole series of games, with many spin-offs and sequels. However, even with all the games in the series, none of them were what Sega thought of as a true arcade sequel at that time. Technically, Golden Axe 2 on Mega Drive was a good sequel, but it was held back by the console's power. Golden Axe. The duel was an experiment as a one-on-one fighting game. An Axe Battler on Game Gear changed the world into an adventure game. All these games were liked, but none had the visual impact and big ideas of the first arcade game. The problem, though, wasn't a lack of ideas, it was the technology. Sega wanted to make a sequel that was better than the original in every way, but the System 16, the same board that brought the first Golden Axe to life, wasn't good enough anymore. To reach a new level of quality, they needed more powerful hardware that could handle huge characters. smoother animations, many more colors on screen, and more complex gameplay. The big change came with the Sega System 32, which was introduced in the early 90s. This new arcade board was a huge step up from the System 16, almost like a jump into the 32-bit era. It could show an amazing number of colors at once, high resolutions, and cool graphics effects like rotations, scaling, and really big characters for that time. The hardware also had more video memory, which let the art team create very rich, smooth, and animated backgrounds. For Sega, this was the spark they needed. The new hardware allowed them to create what had only been in design documents until then, a vast, dynamic, believable fantasy world filled with giant enemies and even more impressive mounts. But most importantly, the System 32 finally made it possible to bring Death Adder back to life, not just as a final boss, but as an epic, scary villain, shown with new direction and visual power never seen before. The making of Golden Axe. The Revenge of Death Adder started in the early 90s. It was created by one of Sega's most respected teams, AM1. This group was known for taking on technical challenges that seemed impossible. It wasn't just a simple development department. It was a real creative hub, a place where programmers, animators, and game designers worked together. They tried out new ideas, often coming up with things that other studios wouldn't use for years. And it was in this spirit of trying new things that they got the idea to make an arcade sequel. They didn't just want to repeat the old game, they wanted to take it to a whole new level. Right from the start, the idea was clear. The Revenge of Death Adder shouldn't just be a bigger and prettier Golden Axe. It had to be a visual and gameplay experience that made players feel like they were inside an interactive fantasy movie. Something that could really amaze and grab attention in arcades, even from far away. To make this happen, the team fully relied on the power of the System 32. It was a very powerful board, but also tricky to handle. Every character, every animation line, every special effect cost a lot in terms of memory and performance. The developers had to balance their big ideas with the technical limits very carefully. One of the trickiest parts was the size of the characters. Sega wanted huge, impressive characters, figures that would fill the screen. They wanted to immediately give the feeling of a more epic, dramatic, and dangerous world. The main characters in The Revenge of Death Adder took up almost a third of the screen, which was incredibly advanced for its time. But this caused a problem. Such large characters used up huge amounts of video memory. To avoid losing smoothness or quality, the artists had to come up with new ways to compress things, smartly reuse animation frames, and optimize colors. It was a very hands-on process, full of trying things out, making mistakes, and constantly making changes. At the same time, Sega made a bold decision, not to reuse the characters from the first Golden Axe. This was a risky choice. The original game was very loved, and Tyrus, Axe Battler, and Gilius were well-known characters. But AM1 wanted to tell a new, bigger, and richer story. They felt it was necessary to bring in fresh heroes, each with their own look and fighting style. That's how 4 completely new main characters were born. Axe Battler, the barbarian with a huge axe, powerful attacks, and meant to be the spiritual successor to the original hero. A tough, impressive warrior, designed for players who loved brute strength. Stern, the centaur with a horse body and a sharp trident. One of the team's boldest choices. Animating a half-man, half-horse character took a huge amount of work, but the result was one of the game's most amazing designs. Dora, the agile, fast warrior, capable of acrobatics and quick attacks. She showed the developers' desire to offer a different type of character than the strong, bulky figures common in the genre. Goa, perhaps the most iconic character of the whole project, a giant who carries a young wizard on his shoulders. A unique team-up, never seen before, that combined brute strength and magic powers in one duo. These characters weren't just different in how they looked. Each had their own special animations, fighting styles, and a huge number of frames, which the System 32 almost struggled to handle. Creating them was a team effort that lasted months. Animators and designers were constantly looking for ways to make every movement as smooth and natural as possible. At the same time, Sega worked on another key feature, the rideable creatures, a special part of the game series. In the first Golden Axe, they were a brilliant idea, but limited by what the System 16 could do. With the System 32, however, the team could really go wild. Bigger creatures, better special effects, more varied attacks, and more detailed movements. Everything was redesigned from scratch, aiming to amaze players not just with the visuals, but also with how interactive it was. The backgrounds in Golden Axe, the Revenge of Death Adder, are often called one of the best-looking things ever in an early 90s arcade game, and for good reason. Anyone who saw the game back then remembers how amazing it looked right away. Each scene felt like a fantasy picture come to life, a painting that moved, breathed, and reacted to what the player did. But behind all that beauty was a lot of hard work, thanks to the new things the System 32 could do and the big dreams of the Sega artists. The first thing you notice is how rich the colors are. Many arcade games back then used a small number of colors, with flat shades or not many different tones. Here, though, the creators tried out a much wider range of colors, making it look almost like a 32-bit game. It's not just about having more colors, but how they use them, like bright reds lighting up a burning village, deep greens that wrap around forests like a living blanket, and dreamy blues and purples that make magical caves feel mysterious. Each level gives off different feelings, almost like it's a chapter in a big, connected adventure. But the backgrounds aren't just pretty to look at, they're alive. Many things in the background react to what your character does, making the game feel deeper and more exciting. In one part, you walk through a destroyed village, with flames shooting up at different times, making it seem like the whole place is falling apart right before your eyes. In another, a dark forest seems to breathe. Twisted trees bend a little, while tiny magical sparks float through the branches. This kind of moving background was something you couldn't even imagine just a few years before. For the characters, their movements are surprisingly good, almost like a cartoon. Unlike the stiff movements of many fighting games back then, the enemies in Revenge of Death Adder seem to have their own personalities. They don't just walk onto the screen, they storm in. Some jump from high platforms, some slide on the ground to surprise players, some roll, some block, and some back away to call for backup. The creators programmed more active behaviors, so it felt like you were fighting an organized army, not just single enemies. One detail that people often remember is the enemies holding torches. These weren't just for show. The light from the fires actually changed how the area around them looked. They did this cleverly by putting glowing pictures on top of the background, making it look almost modern. It was a small technical trick, but it looked amazing. Then there are the special effects, another area where the game was better than its rivals. The magic spells, especially, show off what the System 32 could do. They weren't just simple pictures that turned on and off anymore, but real visual shows. Fire columns animated frame by frame, electric storms with energy lines that seemed to pulse, and explosions that made the screen shake and warp. Some of these effects used many high-quality pictures layered on top of each other, which clearly showed how powerful Sega's board was. This attention to movement wasn't just for attacks or magic, but also for the rideable creatures, which are a big part of the series. In Revenge of Death Adder, these creatures are more detailed, more aggressive, and react more. They have bigger movements, more dramatic attacks, and a huge presence that almost makes each mount feel like a mini-boss that the player controls. While keeping the classic side-scrolling beat-em-up style that made the first Golden Axe a hit, the Revenge of Death Adder quickly became a true step forward, almost like a modern take on the genre. It wasn't just bigger, prettier, or more spectacular. Sega wanted to rethink the basics of gameplay, making it deeper without losing the instant fun that had always been a part of the series. The first big change, and the one that everyone notices, is definitely the 4-player mode. In the early 90s, it wasn't a brand new idea, but it was still rare, and few games could handle it smoothly. Revenge of Death Adder not only put it in the game, but made it a core part of its identity. The special arcade cabinet, big, bright, built just for 4 full sets of controls, was a magnet in arcades. When the 4 heroes moved on screen at the same time, with tons of enemies and really fancy animations, it was amazing. The chaos it created wasn't by accident. It was a big part of the fun. You could find yourself fighting alongside complete strangers, sharing magic, mounts, and laughs, making for a rare and powerful social experience back then. The fighting system, while still easy for anyone to pick up, was much better. Each character had special moves, charged attacks, grabs that changed with the situation, and small animation details that made every hit feel powerful. The idea was to offer a way to play with more style, something that was only hinted at in the first Golden Axe. Skilled players could learn to chain attacks, use the speed or power of different characters, and most importantly, use the mounts in a smarter way. These mounts weren't just occasional bonuses anymore, but real parts of the gameplay. They were more aggressive creatures, with multiple attacks and richer animations, which needed a bit of practice to use well. Another important new feature was the branching level design. In the first Golden Axe, the path was fixed and straight. An epic journey, yes, but always the same. Revenge of Death Adder, however, introduced choices at the end of each level, real forks in the road that led to completely different places. You could go through destroyed villages, haunted forests, unstable canyons, or underground dungeons, and the cool thing was, you wouldn't see them all in one playthrough. This made every game different from the last, and made players want to come back to the arcade cabinet to find new enemies, new places, and new challenges. For an arcade game, where being able to play again and again is everything, this was a brilliant idea. But maybe the most overlooked part of the gameplay is how much you can interact with the environment. Where many beat-em-ups of that time only had static backgrounds and a few things you could break, Revenge of Death Adder brought in catapults that players could control, moving platforms that made you think about where you stood, timed traps to avoid, and obstacles that reacted to your attacks. Some parts almost felt like little interactive toys built into the level. It was a smart way to change things up and add variety without losing the action at the heart of the game. Even though the final game still feels solid and well made today, making Golden Axe, the Revenge of Death Adder was anything but a straight path. Behind the awesome giant sprites and smooth animations was a super complicated technical job, full of constant challenges and tough choices. The System 32, Sega's new generation hardware, was both a promise and a problem at the same time. The System 32 offered way more power than the old System 16, but it had a common issue for arcade machines back then. Almost everything had to be built from scratch. There were no ready-made graphics tools, no sprite management tools, no established ways of working. Most of the helpful tools were made in-house by the programmers and artists on the AM1 team themselves. This meant slow, experimental, and sometimes frustrating work. Every effect, every animation, every transparent part was a small technical win achieved through trying things out, making mistakes, and what we'd call handmade engineering today. One of the trickiest challenges was managing the huge amount of visuals. The character sprites took up tons of memory, and any scene that was too busy risked crashing the hardware. Just too many enemies, a magic spell that was too complex, or a super detailed background could make the game slow down. The team had to learn to live with a kind of invisible math, constantly balancing art and tech. How many enemies can be on screen at once? How many animations can be loaded without filling up the RAM? How many light effects can we use before everything breaks? Every answer was a victory. But the hardware wasn't the only tough part. The 4-player cabinet, which was supposed to be one of the game's main draws, brought up new design problems. With 4 characters on screen, plus dozens of enemies and mounts, the possible confusion grew a lot. Sega had to find the right balance. Too much chaos would make the game annoying, too little would make it lose that epic battle feeling. The difficulty had to be set so that a single player wouldn't get stuck, but at the same time, a group of 4 couldn't just breeze through the game without effort. The solutions they came up with were the result of many tests. Tougher enemies in multiplayer, wider attack patterns, and a layout of spaces designed not to cram the fighters too much. This kind of balancing was almost new territory for the time, and the designers had to create a whole game language around the idea of chaotic cooperation. To make production even harder, there was a very sensitive creative decision. Sega chose not to bring back the famous characters from the first Golden Axe. Axe Battler, Tyrus Flare, and Gilius Thunderhead were loved by fans, and there was a high risk of making the audience unhappy. The choice to bring in a completely new cast, the barbarian Axe Battler, the centaur Stern, the warrior Dora, and the mighty Goa with the wizard on his shoulders, was a bold gamble, but a necessary one. Even with its amazing tech and beautiful look, Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder, never really hit the big commercial success Sega hoped for. It wasn't because it wasn't new or had problems with how it was made. The real issue was with how arcades worked back then, and a market that was changing faster than Sega expected. The first big problem was the System 32, a powerful but super expensive circuit board. For arcade owners, who often made very little money in the 90s, buying a game cabinet with that tech was a risky move. Unlike the more common JAMA systems, which let you swap out game boards in the same cabinet, the System 32 needed more complex setups, sometimes even brand new cabinets. In other words, to have Revenge of Death Adder, you couldn't just change a game cartridge. You had to spend thousands of dollars on hardware that didn't promise a sure return. This put off a lot of owners, especially in smaller and medium-sized arcades, the very ones that made the first Golden Axe so popular. At the same time, in the early 90s, a huge change was happening in the arcade world. People weren't just looking for side-scrolling co-op games anymore. The arrival of Street Fighter II in 1991 completely changed how players played. Competitive fighting games with their skill-based gameplay, high replay value, and the chance to challenge other players brought in steady and repeated money for owners. A Street Fighter cabinet could draw crowds for months, while a co-op beat 'em up, no matter how cool, offered a less deep experience and tended to lose players faster. Because of this, owners almost automatically went for fighting games or machines that offered a quicker, more instant, and more profitable experience. Revenge of Death Adder, with its story-driven structure and longer levels, wasn't really suited for that kind of frequent play. Another big factor was the game's limited release around the world. Sega, knowing how expensive the System 32 was, decided to make fewer copies, hoping the game would become a special draw for the fancier arcades. But actually, this choice made the game rare right from the start. Many players back then never got to see it, let alone play it. The end result was strange, a technical masterpiece that almost no one got to try. The general public kept knowing Golden Axe through the sequels on Mega Drive and Master System, while the true next step in the series, the most advanced, the most ambitious, the most spectacular, stayed hidden in the best-equipped arcades, often in big cities or specialized places. Over time, this limited access helped create an almost legendary status around the game. One of the questions that always comes up when we talk about Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder, is, why did this game never come out on consoles? And it's a very fair question, because we're talking about an important sequel, a beloved title, and an arcade game that, even today, many consider one of the best beat-em-ups ever made. Well, the answer isn't simple or quick, but we can break it down into two main reasons. And the first one is about technology. When Sega developed Revenge of Death Adder, they decided to go all in on the System 32, an arcade board that, at the time, was a real powerhouse. It could handle huge sprites, super smooth animations, advanced graphics effects, and a level of detail on screen that, simply put, no home console of that era could match. Putting that game on the Mega Drive? Impossible without huge compromises. Porting it to the Saturn in the console's early years? Even there, it would have been a huge job for a result that would still be far from the original. In short, any conversion would have looked like a poor version. And Sega, who already knew how much the series was loved, didn't want to release a mediocre port that would make the arcade title look bad. But here's where the second reason comes in, the more strategic one. In the early 90s, Sega was going through a very tricky transition. They had to promote the Saturn, compete with Sony in a market that was increasingly focused on 3D, and get ready for the next big thing, the Dreamcast. In that atmosphere, spending time and money to bring a 2D beat-em-up to consoles wasn't a top priority for the company. Sega preferred to focus on more modern games, ones that would sell better, and ones that better showed off the new era they were trying to create. And so, Revenge of Death Adder, oddly enough, got stuck in a kind of limbo, too advanced to be put on the Mega Drive, too off-target for the Saturn, and too late to catch the 3D wave. The result? The game became an arcade-exclusive gem, a title you could only play by dropping in a coin, surrounded by neon lights and the sounds of other arcade machines. Only many years later, with the rise of retro collections and digital services, did the game start popping up here and there, finally becoming more available to the public. But even in those cases, they're always emulated versions. Great, sure, but never able to perfectly copy the original arcade experience, with its screen, its colors, its impact. Among the many interesting facts about the making of Golden Axe, the Revenge of Death Adder, some are really cool because they show how much the Sega team experimented and dared to try new things when they made the game. One of the funniest stories is about Goa, the giant. At first, in the early ideas, Goa was supposed to be a classic character, huge, super strong, but without any magic. The idea of the little wizard sitting on his shoulder came much later, almost by accident. The developers wanted to add a bit of variety, something to break away from the image of a rough and one-note giant. And so, this unlikely pair was born, a slow, powerful giant, with a tiny wizard who casts spells like he's riding a battle taxi. It wasn't just a clever idea, it completely changed the character's look and his role in the team, making him instantly recognizable and a big favorite with players. But Goa isn't the only thing that changed during development. In the early versions of the game, there were mounts that never made it into the final game, including a creature like a two-legged dragon that could breathe fire over a wide area, almost like a medieval flamethrower. The idea was exciting, but the technical limits of the System 32 and the need to keep the game balanced made the team decide against it. In some old drawings that still exist, this dragon appears, like a ghost of what Revenge of Death Adder could have been. There were also big changes in the sound department. The game actually uses a special sound effects library from Sega that had never been used in a beat-em-up before. We're talking about a set of sounds that were clearer, stronger, and more like a movie than what was normal back then. Many of the metal clangs, the roars of magic, even the sounds of the mounts, came from sound tests originally made for other types of games and then changed just for Revenge of Death Adder. That's why the game has such a special sound. It almost feels more like a modern action game than something from 1992. And speaking of cool visuals, we have to talk about the magic animations. The team didn't just stick to regular pixel art. They used a mix of hand-drawn sprites and pre-rendered parts, which was a very advanced idea for that time. Basically, some parts of the spells, like the fire columns or energy balls, were made digitally and then turned into sprites. This made them look like they had depth and moved smoothly, which was new. It was a slow and hard job, but the final result, even today, is still amazing. And finally, here's a little secret that few people know. There are slightly different versions of the game for different regions. In some arcades in Asia, there were versions with tougher enemies, faster attack styles, and even a lower cost per play. Sega made these versions different to fit the various ways arcades made money in those places, and how players there liked to play. Today, Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder, is seen as a lost masterpiece. It's a game that could have changed its whole genre if it had only made it into players' homes. This game is the best example of a fantasy arcade beat-em-up. Its impact, even if it wasn't direct, can be seen in many games that came after it, from 2D action games to modern hack-and-slash games. Because it's so rare, it's still one of the most sought-after games by arcade fans today, and its quality still amazes anyone lucky enough to play it on an original arcade machine. Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder isn't just a sequel, it's a monument to an era, a statement of purpose from the arcade industry, and a testament to Sega's creativity and ambition in its glory days. It's a game that deserves to be rediscovered, analyzed, and celebrated. And today, thanks to new generations of fans, it continues to live on. Because true legends never fade away. And with that, our trip down memory lane comes to an end. How many of these fun facts did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more trips into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends!